Hello, everyone. How are you? Today, I want to talk about violating boundaries. So, the second kind of boundary violation that I want to talk about is an unintentional violation. Unintentional boundary violations. And so, these can happen when, for like one of the examples that I've had with an unintentional boundary violation was there was a time that I was dating somebody and we had dated for I don't know, a few months or something, and there wasn't any fighting. It wasn't, we had fun. The relationship overall was really fun, but she's like, I just don't think this is some like a dating situation for me. And when we had that conversation, I was like, okay, like that's fine, like I understand. And the last conversation, excuse me, that we had, she's like, we can still hang out, like, have fun together and all that kind of stuff. She's like, I'm open to, whatever, I'm open to things. I just don't want it to be in the same container that it's been in. And I said, okay. She left for 2 or 3 days to go on like a vacation after that. And I think I texted her once or twice while she was gone. How's your trip? And she responded just, oh, fun. We're, going to grab lunch or whatever. It wasn't a lot of communication, but just kind of touching base. And then I gave her a ride home from the airport. So in my mind, right, this is an example of I had one perspective of how I thought things were, and she was having a different experience, and I didn't know. And so in her mind, she was thinking like, from what she told me later, was like, I wasn't thinking that we would just still keep being friends. I think I said that because I don't know if I felt bad or I was still trying to figure it out or whatever it might have been, but that was not clear to me. And so for her, she was having a different experience of, receiving a text or whatever. And so I came over to drop some things off, and I had texted her in advance and said, hey, I have some things I was going to come drop off. If you're not home, I can leave it at the door or whatever, but would that be okay? And she said, sure. When I came to drop these things off, I saw that she was home, the light was on and everything. So I knocked on the door. When I knocked on the door, that was and came in, hey, can I use the restroom? And I could tell her body language was just kind of like frustrated, overwhelmed, whatever. And I noticed that. And I was like, and her communication had been short, but also she had been on vacation. So again, this is a perfect example of one person having an experience over here, another person having a different experience. And so I ran and used the restroom. When I came out, I asked about it, right? And I was like, what, hey, what's going on? Like this, things seem different. Like, are you okay? And so I initiated a conversation. And at that point, all this stuff started coming out of like, oh, like you didn't ask if we could have the conversation. You just started right into it. Come in to use the bathroom. I didn't want you here. I wasn't thinking that we would keep talking. And so she was like, this feels like a boundary violation of my space. So that is an example of an unintentional boundary violation, right? That space wasn't directly asked for. Sometimes people have a hard time saying like, I need space. I need you to not text me for a week, or I need you to not talk again, or I need you to not whatever. And maybe they're expecting that you'll read their body language or pick up on the cues or whatever. And maybe you just don't. And maybe that's because you're in your own head. Maybe you're not being very aware. Maybe you didn't just ask, right? Maybe you're making assumptions. There could be lots of reasons. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But when that happens, right, that's their experience is still valid. That's the first part that I want to highlight here, is that you had your experience over here. You're like, well, the last communication I had was this. So that was the framework I was working on. And yet they're having another experience, right? And to them, they're like, I felt like this should have been clear, and it just wasn't. So honoring the other person's experience and their emotions is really important when that happens, right? And as soon as I realized that, of course, I felt terrible. I was like, I did not mean to do that. But the impact was still there for them, right? Your intention may not have been to violate a boundary. You might have been, whatever was going on for you, but that was their experience. So honoring the other person's experience, honoring their emotion, understanding that that's valid. It's okay for them to feel angry. It's okay for them to feel frustrated. You don't have to try to justify it or explain it, right? And we'll talk later about repairing those kinds of boundary violations if the other person wants to. But for now, I just want you to know that when that happens, it's okay. Their experience is valid also. And you can, again, take that honest inventory and ask yourself some of those questions, which we'll talk about on the next page again. So taking honest inventory, finding out what happened and why, right? Why did this happen? What was I missing? And then honoring your own experience and emotions, okay, without having to change it or fix anything. So honoring theirs and honoring your own, right? Honoring theirs without explanation or judgment, letting it be what it is, and honoring yours without feeling like you have to fix it. You can just be like, yes, this thing happened. I can feel bad about it. I can feel regret. I can feel sad. I can feel whatever I want to feel. I can feel confused, right? And you don't have to try and fix anything. Just being in that experience is really important, because so often, like I said, we get caught up in blame and judgment and shame and defensiveness, right? And that generally does not help. So what do you do moving forward, right, when something like this happens? So again, like I said, if the other person is someone who truly does love and care for you, and they have a desire to engage in a repair process, if this relationship matters to them, if they're willing to repair that, then you can begin that work, okay, with humility, with accountability, and some open communication. And I talk about how to have difficult conversations, and there are some parameters that you can follow in order to have that conversation in a productive way. I'm not going to go into all of that today because it would take too long, but just noticing moving forward, the repair process is something that has to be mutual, right? They have to actually care about this relationship and be willing to do that work. Sometimes they won't. Okay. Sometimes they're going to be just so in their story, in their own emotion. They're going to feel angry. They might feel disrespected. They might feel like you should have known. I shouldn't have had to say anything, or I did say anything, and the fact that you did it anyway is unforgivable, right? They may not be willing to hear or care about what was happening for you, or how you missed that, or how you misunderstood. They may not believe it. They might be like, you're full of shit. Let them have that experience. You don't need to try and drag them up that hill, okay? So if they're not interested in having any kind of a conversation, or repairing, or understanding what happened, and fixing that, then you get to let them be in whatever experience or emotion they choose, and then you get to move forward with your own, okay? And this is where we're going to talk about, like I said, with the unintentional boundary violations, taking on honest inventory and figuring out what happened. I recommend doing this sooner in the process, because if a repair process is going to happen, it's really useful to have these things worked through for yourself before you go into that conversation. So I chose to talk about it in more detail here, but just know that when I talk about taking the honest inventory, figuring out what happened, honoring your experience, honoring their experience, all of this is included in that process, okay? So if they're not interested in having a repair process, if they're not interested in looking at this any further, and they're just done, okay, let them go. And then you get to own what's yours. So the first part of that is your emotions, owning your own emotions. Again, were there emotions happening that contributed to this that I need to go clean up? Can we be honest with ourselves? What was the reason that I did that? What was the reason that I initiated that conversation? Why did I knock on the door? Was there anything in there? Was there any part of me that was trying to manipulate, that was trying to force a relationship? Or was I truly just, you know, being friendly, being loved? I didn't know, right? What was going on for you? Was there anxiety? Was there desperation? Was there anger in whatever it might have been for you? And sometimes our brains can be really tricky, and we'll tell ourselves, no, it was all for a good reason, right? It was all from love. And it's like, but if you really go in there again and take that honest inventory, ask yourself, were there any parts of me where this might have been coming from something else? And be willing to allow yourself to find that. If there's not, sometimes for me, there's not. And I'm like, no, there really wasn't. And sometimes I find that I'm like, you know what? Yeah, maybe there was something in there that wasn't entirely clean or pure, right? Shit, maybe there was something in there where I was, feeling angry, and it was a little bit of, the fuck youery, and just like, whatever, I'm doing it anyway. So be willing to ask yourself that question. Is there anything there that I needed to clean up or that I need to clean up now? What am I feeling now? Am I feeling angry, resentful? Am I blaming them? It's their fault. You didn't communicate. You didn't tell me, right? Generally, the only reason, whenever I catch my brain going into that criticism, blaming, judgment, angry, I'm like, that's not me. Hold on a second. Like there's that happens, but I'm like, where's that coming from? And when I really am able to look at it, I'm like, oh, my brain is doing that. It's called a smokescreen emotion. Our brain will create emotions like anger, resentment, criticism, judgment, and we get so caught up in that because it feels more powerful. And if we don't get caught up in that storm, then there's more vulnerable emotions under there, like sadness. And it's like, I don't want to feel sadness, right? Or that personal accountability. It's like, was there something here that was mine? We don't want to, it's that feels really vulnerable. And so our brain will sometimes try to protect us from that by creating anger and resentment and judgment and stuff like that. So just be onto yourself. Okay. The second part is communication and assumptions, right? When you're owning what's yours, owning your emotions and owning your communication, owning your assumptions. Was there poor communication or misunderstanding that I could have clarified sooner? Right. In that example, I came over, knocked on the door. I was just kind of I was a little bit oblivious. I noticed that, text messages were shorter, or there was a little, or the body language was a little, that there was something a little off, right, with her. But I didn't just ask sooner, right? I assumed, right? Well, maybe there's something going on with work, or sometimes she gets like that. I don't know. If it was about me, she would tell me, right? So maybe I was being a little oblivious. Maybe I could have asked sooner, right? While she was gone on vacation or before I even came over. I don't know. At some point, could I have asked? And I don't know that the answer to that is yes or no, but it's worth asking. Could I have asked earlier, is everything okay? Are you still feeling okay with this communication? I could have checked in for that consent, right? Instead of just assuming, well, the last time we talked, this is what she said. So that's just my working assumption forever now, right? And of course, other people have a responsibility to communicate as well and to just say, hey, this is what's going on for me. I need this space, or I need, a really direct request for whatever it is they're needing. And that's true. And we can also take on that responsibility to say, hey, has something shifted that I'm not aware of? So take a look at that. Was I being naive, thoughtless, unaware? Was I making assumptions that I didn't communicate that created an unintentional boundary violation for somebody else that didn't feel good to them? The last part is inventory and application, right? So this is part of the inventory process. But again, understanding what happened from both sides. What was their perspective, right? What do they think I should have done differently? And could I have done? Is there something in there that's true that I could have taken on, right? Understanding what happened from your perspective. Here's the parts that I'm seeing, because there's always more than one story, right? There's this person's story, their experience. There's the components that they're seeing that you might be missing. There's your experience and the components that you notice that they might be missing. But there's even more than that, right? Maybe if I talk to my friend or my sister about it, they might see a third story. They might see shit that neither one of us are seeing. If I talk to her friends or her sister, right, they might see something different. If I talk to my therapist, my friend at work, my coworker, everyone's going to see something different. And so being willing to take all those perspectives in and ask yourself, what am I missing? Because when we get so caught up in our own stories and justifying how we're right and this is right and blah, 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 we can always do that. And we miss so much when we do that. And so we lose out on that growth. The second part is identifying those contributing factors, right? Taking that from all perspectives. What happened here that I'm missing? Identifying that. Forgive yourself. Forgive the other person, right? Forgive them. You don't need to stay stuck in your anger. A thing happened and it's okay. We're all human. If you need help with this, I can help you with this. But it's like, and sometimes we're not ready. We want to be angry. And if you do, then that's okay. But there's such a freedom in truly, truly being able to find that forgiveness, to be like, I don't think that this was intentional. Or if it was intentional, I wonder why they would have done that. Maybe if I'm in a relationship, right? And I am not saying, I don't want to have a conversation. I don't want to talk about this, right? That's a request. Can we not talk about this now? Okay. And then maybe in 2 days, they ask again. No, I don't want to talk about this now. Maybe in 3 days, in a week. I don't want, and if you're constantly just shutting down, putting it off, putting it off, putting it off, maybe that might be a reason that a partner would finally be like, nope, that's it. I'm blowing in here. We are having this conversation, right? We can't just avoid this forever. Maybe that would be an example of, I said, no, I don't want to have a conversation, but maybe I've been saying that for a long time. And maybe they're feeling like this communication just isn't ever happening, you know, and can I have some compassion for that? That might be an example of that. And the last thing is deciding, what have you learned, or what you have learned from this whole experience? What are the key takeaways that you learned here, and how will you actually own and apply those things moving forward? Because that's what all these experiences are here for, is to show us what are the things that we can own and apply in our lives moving forward, so that we don't have to continue having this happen, right? If you're the one who had a boundary violated, like, what are the things that I can learn so that I can make sure this doesn't continue happening? If you're the one that violated a boundary, what can I learn about this that I can actually apply so that we can avoid this in the future, right? Or have this go more smoothly. And so I think it's so important to recognize that we're all humans, right? We all have all of this. This is all part of the human experience, right? Nothing has gone wrong. We so often, like I said, we want the good, happy things, and we want to avoid the negative things. And we live in a culture and a society that demonizes the negative and glorifies the positive. And, when we're feeling happy, joyful, creative, loving, right? That's when things are going well. But as soon as we start feeling frustrated or angry or resentful or ashamed, it's like, ooh, that's ugly, that's nasty, that's bad. You're not supposed to feel those things. And we have to fix it and get out of it as soon as possible. And I want to say that, no, that's not true at all. Like, Debbie Ford and Deepak Chopra in their book, they talk about this. And it's like, they say, like, the universe did not create spare parts. There's a reason that we have the day and the night. When I was listening to him talk about this, and he's like, if all we had was the sun, right, in the day, in the sunshine, and we didn't have the night and the rain and the cold, he's like, our universe would quickly combust, right? We have to have both. And when you literally cannot know happiness if you've never known sadness. If we were like all just happy all the time, just truly to think about that, there would be no contrast. And contrast is what gives joy meaning, right? Grief is a part of love. We cannot know joy without knowing pain. It would be meaningless. It would not have meaning. We would not appreciate it. We would not have those same dopamine rushes that feel so good in our body. It would all just become this baseline of meaninglessness. And so just knowing that all of this exists for a reason, and that there are literally gifts here that, see, here's the thing, relationships are not just designed to connect us to other people, right? They also are here to connect us to the deepest parts of ourselves. And that includes the love and the light. It includes the pain and the darkness. These relationships are here to connect us to the deepest parts of ourselves. So when I have when I violate someone's boundary in this example, right? And I experience sadness, I experience pain, I experience regret, right? I experience compassion. Like, I feel for that other person, right? And I go and I look at myself, and what could I have done different? And I identify my weaknesses, right? Like, maybe I was totally just in my own head, off in la la land. Maybe I was being naive or thoughtless or unaware. Maybe I should have asked. I noticed a thing, but I just thought it was nothing. I don't know, right? Maybe I should have asked. And so when I can look at those things, then I get to experience this. I get to experience self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness. I get to forgive someone else, right? I get to let them have their emotion. And going through all of these negative experiences, quote unquote, I have so much more empathy for other people. I can help connect with other people when they're in that experience. And I can say, yeah, I've been through that too. I understand. Here's what came up for me when I went through, and here's what I learned, and here's what I found out about myself. And here's how I learned to love myself. and forgive myself. Those are powerful lessons. And we can't experience those if we're not willing to go through these hard things that are by design, by the way. It's all a part of the human experience. You have relationships with other humans, this stuff is going to come up. You're going to see their ugly. You're going to see your own ugly. And how do we relate to those that ugliness, that dark side, that shadow, as they call it, when it comes up? What do we do with it? More often than not, we just say, oh, that person's bad, and we disconnect from them. And we hide it in ourselves. And we say, I would never do that. And so we lie to ourselves and we don't take our own accountability and say, actually, yeah, here's the time that I did that. Right. And we don't tap into that compassion, which is what can create so much love. And so we get stuck in these emotions of anger, defensiveness, right? Judgment, fear, shame, criticism, loss, abandonment of ourselves, abandonment of other people, right? We give up on things that matter. We feel so unworthy, we feel unlovable, we feel not respected. And so we just get caught in these stories and these emotions. And when we're so caught in that, it makes it really difficult for ourselves to step back and go through this process, right? It makes it really difficult for us to step back and go through this process of maybe figuring out what repair looks like. So many of us are like, nope, that sounds hard. I don't want to have that difficult conversation. I don't want to talk about what it would be easier to just not deal with it, right? And I worked with a client recently that was like, I have spent my whole life not dealing with this shit. And it's just easier to be like, oh, it's just, a boss, it's just a coworker, I get a new job, whatever, it's just a Tinder date, I don't have to, why bother, they're not important in my life. And she's like, and now all these things that I have spent my whole life avoiding, right, those kinds of personalities, those kinds of people, she's like, I've just cut them out because it was easier. And now it's my child, right? She's like, now I'm dealing with this with my son, with all these personality conflicts and all these things that I've just never dealt with. And she's like, I feel so frustrated, so angry. I have never developed these mechanisms, these relationship skill sets of being able to have a difficult conversation and how to love someone, even when they're, you know, violating my boundary, or even when they're pushing my buttons or overwhelming me. And she's like, I didn't see this coming. She's like, I didn't realize that the person, and she's like, and now disconnecting, she's like, I can't just cut him out of my life. I don't want to. And so she's like, I'm learning all these things, unfortunately, now on my child. I would have rather learned these hard skill sets in the relationships that I always ran from, because if that didn't go well, then whatever. But now this is so hard, and I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing, and I'm not good at it, right? So those are my thoughts and my recommendations for things to consider when it comes to boundary violations and what to do about it and how to approach it. And just noticing that these emotions oftentimes are A, what caused the violation in the first place, or B, once the violation has happened, we get so sucked into these that they just kind of take over, and we're not able to step back and go through this process of growth and repair, and even just learning, self-learning from a place of love, so that we can embrace the lesson and the gift that this thing is trying to give us. So if you want help with any of that, I'm here. And otherwise, I love you, and I'll talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.